with panel discussions. But first, to set the context of the next discussion, building resilient tourism destinations, it is my honor to introduce this speaker from UN Tourism. He will be giving us a brief presentation to set the scene for what we will cover next. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the Senior Program Officer for Market Intelligence, Policies, and Competitiveness, once again from UN Tourism. A round of applause for Mr. Javier Ruescas.
Thank you very much, Isa, and thanks everybody. First, start saying thanks to the Department of Tourism from the Philippines. It's wonderful to be back in the Philippines. We love the Philippines. We love Cebu. Viva Pit Señor. Remember the festival, the Sinulog Festival. So I believe there's a presentation up on the screen. Let me also thank ADB. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't because of Asian Development Bank. Please a round of applause for ADB for organizing this interesting conference. And can I acknowledge also the presence of our Executive Director at UN Tourism, Mr. Shijun Liu. Thanks very much. So this presentation has a few slides very quickly on the results of our latest World Tourism Barometer. In the Market Intelligence Department, we publish the barometer, which is every 3 months, so 4 barometers a year. These are the results of the latest data we published just last week, actually. The graph shows the evolution of tourism since the beginning of the 2000s, so 2006. You see the line in international arrivals peaking in 2019, so just before the pandemic, and then dropping, plunging in 2020, 72%, as the pandemic kicked in. Now, in 2025, last year, we recovered 4% above pre-pandemic levels. So you can see in the graph, 1,523 million international tourist arrivals. That's 4% higher than in 2024. In the next slide, you will see the same information, but for receipts. So the blue line is arrivals, that's the number of international visitors, and the green line is the spending of visitors in destinations. So here, the actual drop was softer. You can see that the green line didn't drop as much, 63% in 2020, and then it recovered faster. So in 2025, last year, preliminary data shows almost $1.9 trillion in visitor spending around the world. That's about 5 to 6% higher than 2024. We still don't have the actual data in real terms because we have to discount inflation and the exchange rates. But there you can see the faster recovery in spending. Why? Because since the pandemic, visitors spend on average much more than before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, an international visitor would spend an average $1,000 per international trip. After the pandemic, it's around $1,300. That's why the recovery in spending was faster. That's great news for destinations. That's great news for the tourism sector, for the the businesses and small tour operators and hotels and the airlines, and especially for the communities who depend on tourism. The next slide shows the same information in terms of growth, so percentage growth. There you see in 2018 and 2019 growth. Then 2020, 72% decline. 21, 69, 33%. These are percentage change from 2019. So this graph shows the recovery of international tourist arrivals during the pandemic. In 2023, the world recovered 90% of the number of arrivals. So you see 10% below 2019 levels. And finally, in 2024, a pivotal year for international tourism, full recovery of international tourist arrivals, 1,470 million. That was in 2024. Last year, as I said before, a 4% increase in international tourist arrivals. Whoa. What happened there? If I can ask the colleagues from the technical team back there to put the slide back on. We were in that one. Excellent. Please leave it there. So I was just showing a graph in terms of the recovery, and this one is the same information, but from a recovery point of view. So the blue shaded bar is the recovery, and the white or transparent part is the decline. So same information in 2025. International arrivals were at 104%, so 4% above 2019 levels. Next slide, please. This graph shows the results of international tourism in 2025 by region. So you see in the middle there, in the world, 4% higher, as I mentioned before. And here in the Asia-Pacific region, there was a 6% increase in international tourist arrivals, but compared to 2019, it's still slightly below. It's still 9% below 2019 levels in terms of international tourist arrivals. This is the same information, but for ASEAN. So for the member states of ASEAN, the number of international tourist arrivals. The pattern is similar, but a slightly slower trend in terms of the recovery. So in 2024, while globally arrivals had already recovered fully, in ASEAN, it was still 88%. So it was still 12% below pre-pandemic levels. And last year, these are still preliminary estimates. We don't have the full year data for all countries yet. The preliminary estimates point to 90% recovery, so 10% below. These are conservative estimates, so it'll probably be better than that, but we tend to be conservative when we do our preliminary estimates. The next slide shows the recovery of ASEAN in the orange line compared to the global recovery. So you see that before 2019, ASEAN destinations actually grew faster than the world average. You see the orange line was higher than the blue line with 7, 6, 9%, very strong growth. This shows really the strength of the destinations, the resilience, which we'll talk about in a moment, and also the strong promotional efforts of the ASEAN member states in promoting international tourism. But when the pandemic hit, the recovery was slower because of more conservative approach to the actual COVID-19 pandemic in terms of protecting the people against transmission. So ASEAN countries in general were slower to recover because of slightly slower reopening to international tourism with travel restrictions taking longer to be lifted. The next slide shows the same information, but there we go. In terms of volume of arrivals and receipts in ASEAN, so the orange line is the number of international tourist arrivals. So 138 million in 2019, and then 125 million 2025 last year. So that's what I mentioned before, about a 90% recovery. In terms of receipts, 8 to 9% above 2019 levels, below 2019 levels, with almost 140 billion US dollars in receipts. And this data is slightly different from the colleagues from ASEAN that talked before. I believe the Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN mentioned a figure which is slightly similar to this one, but of course we have slightly different definitions in terms of the concepts, the way we define them. This graph shows the percentage of international tourist arrivals globally by region. So you see Europe accounts for over 50% of all the arrivals in the world. Asia accounts for 22%. This was last year. And within Asia, ASEAN, you can see they're highlighted in orange, accounts for 8%. So ASEAN destinations account for 8% of all the international tourist arrivals in the world. Within Asia and the Pacific, ASEAN accounts for 38%. So almost 40% of all international tourist arrivals in Asia correspond to the countries of Southeast Asia. You see there, Northeast Asia accounts for 47%, ASEAN for 38%. Quickly moving on, in terms of the source markets, and some speakers before me mentioned this, intra-ASEAN tourism accounts for 38%. So of all the international arrivals in this part of the world, almost 40% come from within the same region within ASEAN countries. Other Asian markets account for 1/4, so 25%. And then China accounts for 16%. Huge chunk of the arrivals in Southeast Asia account for one single market, which is China. Europe, only 13%, of course, because of the distance, because of geographical reasons, and other markets about 8%. I'll jump to this graph, which shows the results of a survey that we do among tourism experts around the world 3 times a year. And we ask them, what are your prospects for your destination? In this case, in 2026, how do you think the tourism sector will fare this year? And you see that 52% of the experts said that better. 6% said much better. So in total, 58% of all the people surveyed believe that tourism will do better this year than last year. There's about a third, 31%, who said it will be about the same, performance will be similar, and 11% of slightly more pessimistic experts who believe that the tourism sector will do worse in their destination this year. So this is fairly an optimistic, let's say, scenario for the coming year, which builds on the forecast that we do at UN Tourism in the Market Intelligence Department. We rely on this type of information very much, apart from other statistical tools to do our forecast, which I'll show you in a minute. This graph shows the main concerns. So what are you mostly concerned? What risks do you see for the tourism sector in your destination in 2026? And these are the most important factors which were mentioned. The number one was economic factors. Economic can mean, a slowdown in the growth, economic growth. It can mean volatile oil prices. It can mean, higher interest rates. So economic concerns are the main concern. It says other and not just economic because the second factor is already an economic factor, which is inflation. High accommodation and transport costs. 45% of all the experts mentioned high tourism prices as one of the most important factors impacting tourism this year. And then geopolitical risks, of course, were also mentioned, the different conflicts and tensions in different parts of the world. Just to finish, I think I skipped one. This graph shows a comparison between headline inflation, which is the normal inflation of all goods and services, which is the blue line, published by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. You see that prices, so inflation, globally peaked in 2020 at 8.7%, and it has been declining gradually. But tourism inflation, in other words, inflation of tourism services was much higher. That's the yellow line, peaking at 13.9% in 2022. This is a tourism inflation calculation that we did at the Market Intelligence Department based on monthly data for accommodation and restaurants and transport inflation data. So it's very interesting to see that finally tourism inflation is coming down, and the estimate for 2025 last year was 5%. So that's optimistic. That's a positive news for the sector. Slower growth in tourism prices, but still higher than average inflation. So 5% compared to 4% for the general global inflation. Which brings me to our forecast. So this graph basically shows the growth or decline in international tourist arrivals year by year from 2014 up until 2025. Same thing I explained before, big decline during the pandemic, 4% last year. And this year, 2026, we expect 3 to 4% growth in arrivals. As long as the economic outlook remains favorable, which according to different economic institutions, it will be a good year from an economic point of view. As long as, excuse me, some geopolitical conflicts do not escalate, there's risks from a geopolitical point of view in different parts of the world, and that's an important caveat to bear in mind. And as long, finally, as tourism prices, tourism in the tourism sector continue to decline, 3 to 4% growth in arrivals this year. To talk very briefly about resilience, which is the panel that we will be participating in a moment, just some very quick ideas, because the other panelists will also mention this, but building resilient destinations, and we've heard the ministers before talk about this very thoroughly from different points of view, from the different ASEAN member states, has to do with building sustainable and inclusive destinations and working in the three pillars of sustainability, which are, of course, economic, social, and environmental sustainability. So people, planet, and prosperity. Building resilience also has to do with building a skilled workforce, decent work, and social protection. And I believe there's a panel after this also to talk about workforce. And diversifying destination and source markets. Very important to talk about seasonality and diversifying source markets in terms of building resilience in destinations, as tourism destinations. The next slide should show a number of, next slide please, if you can jump to the next one. Yeah, in terms of diversifying destinations, one of the things we're doing at UN Tourism is actually promoting rural tourism. So it's not just about international tourism and bringing international visitors to the destination, but also promoting domestic tourism and promoting destinations within the countries, which are not just the typical seaside resort, the typical capital or main urban destinations, but rural destinations. And we have a program called the BTV, the Best Tourism Villages, which recognizes rural destinations that excel in sustainability and cultural preservation, which helps many destinations to promote their rural destinations. And this map shows the over 230 BTVs, or Best Tourism Villages, all over the world. You can see at the bottom right-hand part of the map that there's 13 Best Tourism Villages within ASEAN, mostly in Indonesia, Malaysia, here in the Philippines, and also in Vietnam. Also important to mention this action plan that we did for the South African presidency of the G20, Action Plan for Enhanced Resilience in Inclusive Sustainable Tourism Development. You can find this online. And to remind everybody that the United Nations declared 2027, so next year, the International Year of Sustainable and Resilient Tourism, building on the realization that international tourism and resilient tourism in particular is crucial for communities and for economic growth and development for many communities around the world. I think this is it. Just to show you a report that we're currently working on at the Market Intelligence Department at UN Tourism, the World Tourism Report. Some of you might have heard about it. It's basically a sort of index which compiles performance indicators and policy enablers. So just to show you the resilience part, the resilience indicators within that index are these which you can see on screen. So to see how resilient destinations are, we create a number of parameters and we code them. So we give them points from 0 to 100 based on these parameters. So seasonality, market dependency, the stability of demand, and length of stay. Just to show you some examples in terms of seasonality, and seasonality is something that most destinations work on to a certain point of view, to a certain point, because seasonality is also dependent on some factors that cannot be changed, like geographic factors, for example. In the next slide, I believe I have some information on how seasonal the different regions in the world are. If I can have the next slide, there you go. So this graph, it's interesting. It shows the number of international arrivals from January to December in the last 2 years, the last 3 years. So the blue line is 2025. And I think I'm running out of time. Just to show you that globally, 32% of all arrivals occur in the three summer months, Northern Hemisphere summer months of June, July, and August. So 32%. Now, compare that with Asia, for example, or Europe. In Europe, June, July, and August accounts for 37%. So more than a third of all arrivals occur in 3 months of the summer. But here in Asia, due to cultural reasons, but also because of geography. Where we are now, and in ASEAN destinations, it's a tropical destination, so you don't have to wait for summer to travel here. You can come here throughout the year. It's fairly warm and pleasant throughout the year. So this shows you a very flat distribution of arrivals throughout the year, and the 3 busiest months only account for 25% of the total arrivals of the year. So compare that 25 with 37% in Europe. And I'll finish with that because I think I've run out of time. We can discuss in a moment the information about the resilience with our panel participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Javier Ruescas. Can you take the second seat over here? We'll have Javier as a panelist. For the next session, this is our high-level panel on building resilient tourism destinations, which I will moderate. And I will first call the other 2 panelists, if you can come on stage, please. We have Mr. Daniel Wu, Director for Global Affairs at Agoda. And we also have Ms. Karen May Sarinas Baido, Assistant Chief Operating Officer of Tourism Enterprise Zone, or TEZ Management Sector. So if I can have you. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everyone. So Javier set the scene for us. We saw some statistics, great context setting over there. In this session, we want to ask some hard questions. So we want to understand, where do we face trade-offs between speed and long-term resilience? Who pays for resilience investments, and who ultimately benefits? So everyone talks about resilience, another keyword from this morning, but where have we overestimated tourism's ability to absorb shocks? And what did it cost our destinations, our communities, and our future? So I look forward to a very frank and forward-looking discussion with all of you. I'll start with Karen. Earlier, Secretary Christine Frasco talked about the shocks that Cebu faced. No, there are a lot of natural disasters last year in September. A big earthquake hit Cebu, another storm in November. This is Kalmegi. And so there have been many deaths, infrastructure was affected. So Cebu is still recovering. So Karen, I'd like to ask you, as ASEAN countries look to attract investment that builds resilience, how can we address disasters and shocks like this in order to recover? What policy and regulatory conditions would accelerate capital deployment to address issues like this?
So thank you. Good morning, everyone. So before I start, maybe I'd like to introduce the agency which I represent so that you could also understand the lens from which I'm coming from. So I represent the TIEZA, the Tourism Infrastructure and Enterprise Zone Authority. It is a government corporation. We are the infrastructure arm of the Philippine Department of Tourism, but uniquely we are also the Philippines sector-specific investment promotion agency for tourism. So we are in that unique position to drive both public and private capital towards resilient tourism infrastructure. So in our experience, we have found 3 conditions that consistently accelerate investment in tourism infrastructure. So we have heard earlier in the welcome remarks that in ASEAN, capital had been, the contribution had been around $372 billion, and we have been supporting almost 45 million jobs. But looking at the investments done in tourism infrastructure, there is a wide gap in terms of that. And so we are lagging behind in terms of reliable water, sanitation, power, and connectivity. And in our experience, investors are increasingly looking at that because we are living in a volatile, uncertain world. And they are looking at those factors to de-risk their investments. So in our experience, one condition is the infrastructure readiness. So the infrastructure readiness is very important. So that is why in our mandate, we have shifted our focus towards public investment infrastructure. We have recently focused on not sexy and glamorous projects like wastewater, sanitation, drainage in our key and emerging destinations. Across tourism corridors, we have built tourist rest areas. In our key diving destinations, we have built hyperbaric chambers. So these are some of the examples that we have been doing because these are what investors have been looking at. Another thing is for regulatory clarity and coordination, because when the rules or the guidelines are not clear, private capital hesitates. So in our experience, we have a concept or a framework that we call the Tourism Enterprise Zone. Like for example, in San Vicente, Palawan, we have a single governance framework whereby a management committee takes charge of the tourism development. It is chaired by our agency with our local government unit forming part of that committee, as well as the private sector. So with that, permitting, incentives, infrastructure are in one pathway. So the investors really appreciate that. And lastly, policy. Policy helps steer investment. So I think that really influences where investment goes. And that is from our experience in our agency.
Thank you, Karen. So infrastructure readiness, regulatory clarity, policy, key priorities to look at in order to address, in order to build greater resilience. I'll move over to Daniel now. Daniel, from the private sector's perspective, what destination weaknesses most threaten operational continuity in crisis situations? And how could governments respond effectively? Maybe you can give examples as well.
Hello. Thank you, Mitzi. It's a pleasure to spend some time with the group up here today and talk about this topic. It's a topic that's near and dear to our heart. So for us, it's important to reframe the concept of destination weakness instead of an risk management concept. Think of it as a differentiator. And one of the things that emerged out of the recent pandemic is that we now live in a world that is truly never normal. And one of the things that we identified as we looked deeper was that travelers respond to trust signals. And trust signals, if you look even deeper, has maybe 3 distinct features when it comes to how travelers think about trust. Number 1, infrastructure readiness. That means the whole range from digital infrastructure to hard infrastructure to on-the-ground communications. That means power, water, internet, electricity has to work and interlock with each other to ensure that there's continuity through the good times and maybe sometimes the bad times. Number 2, workforce development. One of the things that emerged out of the pandemic was the exodus of the travel industry, employees within, who pursued different roles in different parts of their lives. And as a result, there was a loss of institutional knowledge and perhaps a drop of service quality due to the lack of retention of talent, of leadership, of skills. And that's a problem. 3, communications. It's very important that travelers know where they can go to get a single source of credible and confident truth. It's really basic, but it's an area of work that, depending on the geography that we're talking about, it could mean a sporadic digital communication system without a means to effectively scale a government update, for example, in a crisis situation, to get the word out to travelers in different languages that they can understand and they can take away and be actionable. But the reality is that emerging out of the crisis, we also learned that addressing these issues also has really tangible, tactical, and actionable strategies. Number 1, the way to first of all even do this is to ensure that you run tabletop exercises, bringing together the public and private sector to think about ways that how a pandemic or any kind of crisis might disrupt operations and work through that step by step, what that would look like. Really cool stuff. Number 2, really interesting stuff is that we ensure that you have a means to scale communications through, for example, a digital communication system, or even working across the tourism ecosystem, making sure that when the government does have an update, they have a means to reach out to travelers with or without having a mobile device. And maybe lastly, third, something that is very important to us is, again, workforce continuity. One of the very interesting things about the current structure of the tourism sector is that, well, or any sector for that matter, is that employment is often tied to the employer. Really basic, right? But the problem is that if you look at the tourism sector and the structure of employment, you still often see informal arrangements, without contracts, or it was like a part-time basis, or it's a day-by-day wage basis, meaning that should the employer face a disruption, employment then is at risk, the employee is at risk. So there's an opportunity here to think about restructuring the employment structure within the tourism sector. For example, detaching the employee to the employer and connecting it with more institutional support. So for example, instead of like insurance and healthcare or skills development being tied to the employer, could we tie that to something more public sector driven? So these are ways that we think about it, but most importantly, it's a mindset change. You cannot think about destination weakness and management thereof as a risk management thing only. You can think about it as a differentiator. That is a type of premium that travelers respond to, and that's the thing we would support.
Thank you, Daniel. Mindset change. Very good points there. You talked about trust. Trust is a currency we operate on now. I couldn't help thinking as you spoke about that. It's very much like a relationship, isn't it? You need to trust, you need to love. Love is about working on the workforce, right? Workforce development. You got to love the people. The industry works, after all, because of the people. You talked about communications. Good communications is key so that we can make sure we work together well and we don't work in silos. So a big part of this is data, and I want to go to Javier now. Data is very much important in order to plan, in order to bounce back. And when we talk about recovery to resilience, many destinations really bounce back rapidly, but resilience is really not about quick speed, is it? So I'd like to ask you, Javier, to talk about data. How can we use data to make sure that we look at the right timing, maybe look at examples at how countries, maybe in the ASEAN, bounce back too quickly, and maybe the toll it took on certain aspects like communities or the environment?
Thank you. Thank you, Mitzi. Well, basically, I mean, to better manage, you need to measure, right? I mean, if you don't have data, you can't really manage or plan or set, short, medium, or long-term objectives. ASEAN countries have excellent data systems and excellent intelligence, market intelligence systems, but sometimes there's always room for improvement in terms of the frequency of the data. So most countries have very good annual data in terms of arrivals, whether it's overnight visitors or same-day visitors, in terms of the spending, which is the travel item in the balance of payments, which is an annual data, how much are international visitors spending in the destinations. But some countries should think of expanding the coverage in terms of higher frequency data, in other words, monthly or quarterly data, to know very well throughout the year how their tourism destination is performing, and to be able to benchmark it with other destinations, with nearby countries, with competitors. So the frequency of data is very important to be able to better manage it. And we talked about resilience. We're talking about resilience and seasonality. How can you calculate seasonality if you don't have monthly data that tells you how many visitors come to your destination throughout the year, from January to December? So data is just crucial for efficient management.
Data is also very expensive, and that's why investments in studies and scientific gathering is really important. So hopefully everyone will think about investing in that. And I have so many more questions, but unfortunately we are running out of time. We started late, so I'll just end by asking you all to wrap up with, briefly, if you can answer this. I'd like to ask, as we look at the ATSP priority areas, what is the one concrete change you would prioritize in the next, let's say, 3 years to make resilience real and to achieve these goals? Can I start with Karen, just very briefly?
So looking at resilience, resilience is not just bouncing back. It's really operating despite ongoing stress and disruption. So during the COVID, when we were still in the pandemic, we didn't think that we should bounce back quickly, but that we should do things better. And we were thinking about how we could do it for the long term when we open. And so we should look at the trade-off between the speed of recovery and the strength of recovery. So it's tempting to focus on the quick wins, but I think that we should look at the long term. And then we should also not just look at tourism as marketing, but really focus on tourism in terms of infrastructure and investment, because that will really bring about the numbers that we want and the strength that we want. And so that will bring us the competitiveness that we really want. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you, Karen. Daniel?
Karen made a really good point, and I want to say this again. It sounds boring, but that's the most important part. currently, even for us who work on public policy, who work on business, we often live life in the fast lane. We think, do something today, boom, tomorrow results. But the reality is that resilience is about better, faster, cheaper, more efficient, more secure. These things take time. And big, bold, but boring is actually the name of the game. So when I think of resilience, I think about decisions that make sense in the good times and even the bad times, which means that it pays out even in the good times as much as the bad times. So there's one consideration I'd love to recommend is, again, the mindset change that don't think in terms of solving for symptoms, think in terms of solving for systems. And that's where Karen's point comes in, that we need to build that foundational fundamentals that will make sense in the good times and the bad times. And that's where the ASEAN Tourism Strategic Plan clearly outlines those priorities, and be very, very keen to bring that to life.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Javier?
Quick mention about learning from past crises. I mean, resilience is building infrastructure, is diversifying your markets. It's having some crisis preparedness measures, but it's also about learning from past crises. So what happened in SARS 2003 here in Asia? What happened during the global economic crisis in 2009? What happened in the United States or in the Americas overall in 2001 with the September 11th attacks? Look at past crises, see what went wrong, see what went right, what were the efficient and valuable and good measures that were adequate measures that were taken in those moments to build on future crises and preparedness. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Well, I'll just summarize what some of the highlights from this the last question. So Karen talked about long-term, looking at the long-term over quick wins, something we need to consider. It's not about being fast, but looking at quality. Daniel talked about this mindset change. We have to look at good times and bad and remember that things need time. Sometimes it's important to pause, and I think that's what the pandemic taught us. We need to stop, and especially we learned this from nature as well. Sometimes we need to pause for things to recover well. And as Javier said, learning from the past. That's why we're all here as well. We're learning from one another and from each other's experiences. So thank you to our panel. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you for your insights and sharing your time with us. You can now take your seats. We'll move on to the next panel. I'll turn you over to Isa. Thank you very, very much, Mitzi. And that's only our first panel discussion for the day. However, before we introduce the next panel, to set the stage, we have the head of the Tourism Unit, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, to present, again, key data and trends. This time about the topic, empowering the tourism workforce. Everyone, a round of applause, please, for Miss Jane Stacy. There she is. Hi, Jane. Okay.
I got up ahead of you, Isa. Good morning, everyone. It's not working. Thank you. Yes, you can hear me better now. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Isa. It really is a privilege to join you here in Cebu today and to contribute to the discussion on how we can empower the tourism workforce. I think the previous panel set up our discussion really nicely, and the ASEAN Deputy Secretary General reminded us this morning that here we're talking about the people who create the experiences that make destinations vibrant, competitive, resilient, and sustainable. So it really is at the core of the discussion and what the ASEAN Tourism Sectoral Plan is setting out to do. At the OECD, let me see if I'm capable of managing. Maybe we can move to the next slide. It's not working for me. Thank you. At the OECD, we provide practical, evidence-based policy advice and analysis to governments to support economic development, including on tourism. 2 ASEAN countries, Indonesia and Thailand, are currently accession countries to the OECD, and tourism is an important component of an MOU between the OECD and ASEAN under the OECD's Southeast Asia Regional Programme, which is currently co-chaired by the Philippines and Canada. I congratulate ASEAN on the launch of the Tourism Sectoral Plan this morning, and very much thank the Philippines Department of Tourism and the ADB colleagues for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. Moving to the next slide. if maybe the colleagues can move it for me, because I seem to be, just park that, and maybe the colleagues could manage my slides as I'm having technical issues. As highlighted in the sectoral plan and earlier discussions, empowering the tourism workforce is central to building resilience. Tourism is highly labour intensive. We all know that in the room. It offers first jobs, second chances, entrepreneurial pathways, especially for youth, women, and other groups that are often marginalised from the workplace. But long-standing structural challenges persist in the tourism sector, linked with seasonality, limited opportunities for progression. Daniel from Agoda just mentioned the issue of casual, part-time, informal employment as well. And but these workforce issues, they're not just labour issues, labour market issues. They directly influence service quality, productivity, investment attractiveness, and long-term competitiveness. And addressing them is essential if, as a sector, we are to unlock the potential of tourism. Next slide, please. So attraction, retention remain critical issues within the sector as labour and skills gaps persist. Last week at an industry event in Europe, one of the issues that the private sector was raising, and a private sector colleague took the floor and highlighted that labour shortages were one of the most pressing issues, if not the most pressing issue for business survival at the moment. So this really highlights for the businesses operating in the sector really how crucial this issue is. Tourism competes with other sectors, which may offer better pay, more regular hours, clearer career paths, and the predominance of SMEs in the sector also limits capacity to invest in training, to develop HR systems, to encourage attraction, retention, development of our workforce. Accreditation processes, mobility constraints, the availability of housing, other external factors add further pressures. Next slide, please. And if we look at some of the available data, accommodation and food services account for around half of tourism employment. This is on average across countries. It can range from anywhere from 40% to 60% depending on the country. But in many countries, including here in Southeast Asia, there are higher vacancy rates in the tourism, in the accommodation and food services sector than there are across the rest of the economy. So you'll see the red bar in the graph on screen. This is the case for Malaysia, for Singapore, for Thailand. So this is a clear signal that workforce shortages are holding back business growth, business recovery within the sector. Next slide, please. Broader economic volatility, linked also with geopolitical tensions, also affects tourism, as Javier just mentioned in his intervention, and also impacts the tourism workforce. From OECD projections, we see that there are signs labour markets are weakening, and this may intensify further competition for tourism for workers in the sector. At the same time, expectations are evolving. Workers are seeking more flexible, meaningful service and secure opportunities. The employee value proposition is changing. Climate-related threats also pose a threat. Climate-related threats also pose health, safety and comfort risks for tourism workers. This is something which the Secretary from the Philippines raised this morning as well in terms of the impact of recent weather-related events. We often look at the impact on tourists, but what of the impact on workers in the sector? And this is something which is very much emerging from work we're doing at the OECD on this topic of the adapting to extreme weather-related events in tourism. There will be a chapter of our flagship publication on tourism trends and policies published later this year. And let me say a particular word on artificial intelligence, which is a game changer and is a hot topic at the moment. Next slide, please. AI presents major opportunities within our sector to boost innovation, but it also brings risks that need to be managed. Automation can reduce the burden of routine or physically demanding tasks in the sector, potentially increasing job attractiveness, but this also brings the risk of job displacement. OECD estimates that around a quarter of occupations across the economy in general face high automation risks. workers will need not just more technical skills, but they'll also need more human skills, and these human skills become even more important in an AI environment. To use the AI tools effectively, but also to deliver the more personalized experiences that we see consumers are demanding. There's also a risk that AI will amplify existing inequalities. Biases in hiring tools, for example, may particularly affect women, minority groups, low-skilled workers. So existing biases may be embedded in new AI tools. AI tools that monitor and manage work may actually lead to more intense work rates and unpredictable schedules. So these are initiatives, these issues are being explored in OECD work for the G7 and also work that we've been doing with Korea as part of its APEC host year in 2024. And we will be publishing a report shortly with Korea on these topics, and a number of ASEAN countries have been involved in this work already. And one of the initiatives that has really come out of that work to highlight is the PATA initiative, for example, in building capacity to adapt to these changes in AI at a destination level. Next slide, please. Let me briefly highlight 3 examples from countries that may inspire some of the discussions in ASEAN. First is Costa Rica, where Costa Rica has in recent years introduced an online training platform offering modules on sustainable finance and certification that is accessible to workers, to businesses, within the flow of the business work as well. So bringing training to meet the needs and the realities of the workplace in tourism. In Finland, businesses in destinations are cooperating to offer year-round employment. So, for example, a worker that works in a tour company during the winter season may work in a hotel or restaurant in the same destination in the shoulder or the summer season. And TUI, the tour operator, is piloting similar internal solutions. In New Zealand, coming to the point on data that was raised, surveys such as Voices from the Frontline give workers a platform to share their concerns and to shape improvements in job quality and long-term sustainability, and to shape government policy in these areas. Next slide, please. Across countries, our work shows that successful workforce strategies share common features. First is embedding the tourism workforce planning into broader tourism strategies and plans, which is what the ATSP is doing, including actions to reduce seasonality, a whole of sector approach, linking tourism, skills, labour, SME policies and other relevant policies, and of course working closely with the private sector and the educational institutions. Taking a skills-first orientation, embedding the recognition of skills, enabling the recognition of skills when and where they are required. This could be recognition of prior learning, for example. A strong focus on job quality, connecting better work conditions with productivity gains, and robust evidence and monitoring frameworks to ensure interventions are targeted, cost-effective, and responsive. Next slide, please. So in closing, the empowering the tourism workforce is essential to competing on quality, transitioning to more sustainable models of tourism, and ensuring that the benefits of tourism are widely shared. I look forward to the discussion as we work together to build a more resilient, sustainable and inclusive, people-centred tourism economy. And as ASEAN countries implement the tourism sectoral plan, please count on the OECD's support. Our previous Secretary General had a mantra: implementation, implementation, implementation. We can talk about policy, and we love to talk about policy at the OECD, but the change happens when we implement and we actually move to doing. So I look forward to the discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Thank you for that, Ms. Jane Stacy, who I asked to remain because it's time for the panel discussion. And yes, that pretty much hit the nail on the head, because even from our Deputy Secretary General, today is not just about talk, it's about action. Implementation indeed. Now allow me to introduce the rest of the panelists for this next high-level panel discussion, focusing on workforce, development, skills, and inclusion. We have the Chief Executive Officer of Pacific Asia Travel Association, Noor Ahmad Hamid. Kindly join us on stage. We also have Mega World Hotels and Resorts Managing Director, Ms. Cleofe Albiso. And finally, Asia World Travel and Tourism Council's Regional Director, Sarah Wang, joined of course by Ms. Jane Stacy, who's already seated, and this will be moderated by ADB Senior Tourism Industry Specialist. I turn you over to Ms. Jessie Macomb. Hi, Jessie.
Thank you very much, Isa. And a big thank you to Jane for that absolutely amazing presentation and a very inspiring and directive finale there with implementation. I think what's fascinating and also very encouraging is how important workforce development has come out throughout this morning and throughout the week's conversations and what we're hearing from everyone, that this is really a critical issue that we're seeing in the tourism industry. And maybe what I'll do just to start, sure. We have another one. Great, making sure everyone can be heard. Maybe what we'll do just to start a little bit is actually take that point that you made about implementation and really say, what at OECD have you seen? What policies in action have you seen that can really work to reduce this workforce shortage, right? This is one of the pressing issues that we continue to hear in the post-COVID recovery. So in reality, in action, what has worked and what can ASEAN learn from that?
Thank you. Thank you. You can hear me now. Great. As you can see, I'm not very technologically skilled. So I have other skills, but that's not one of them. So thanks for the question, Jessie, and happy to pick up on that point. I think the main message I would give is there's no silver bullet. There's no one single solution fixing the shortages. What we see is that a set of policies, a set of actions that work together can advance these issues. There are many long-standing issues in the sector, and unentrenching them, if you like, takes coordinated action across a number of activities. Maybe to highlight a few and highlight some examples of what we see in other OECD countries. First is improving job quality. This is absolutely fundamental to improving the attractiveness and to actually bringing people in the first place into the sector and keeping them there. Lack of workers in the sector is not or labour shortages are not always due to lack of workers. It can be due to a lack of attractiveness. After the pandemic, as was said previously this morning, many people left the sector, and the private sector really worked to redesign roles, to offer more flexible hours, to improve pay, shift patterns, and all these changes and actions that the private sector has been taking has helped to attract people back into the sector. But we have this ongoing issue of high turnover and vacancy rates. There are government supports that are helping as well. Maybe to highlight, in Ireland, there is an employer excellence programme. So that helps businesses to improve their workplace practices, to understand what the issues are within their workplace, and also to improve staff engagement. Another initiative that I particularly like is where government is partnering with the private sector. So where in Switzerland, Gastro Suisse, which is the hospitality association in Switzerland, developed a 5-point action plan. And the government was so impressed, they came in behind it and said, we're going to support you financially to implement this action plan. So really coming behind where private sector is identifying what the issues are and government is coming in to support. I think that's a really good approach. In Mexico, tourism is a priority sector in the Gender Parity Initiative. This is a wider initiative across the Mexican government. And it's helping to remove barriers that disproportionately affect women. So that is one aspect. I can talk on many topics, but I cede the floor.
Thank you so much, Jane. The 3 points that you hit on, I think are so important, is really looking at that job quality to be able to retain workers, draw people back. One of the myths that I feel like I often face in my role in ADB is this idea that tourism is a low-skilled industry. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think, okay, maybe we're not talking about higher education degrees, but there is real skill, soft skills, hard skills, technical skills throughout the tourism value chain. And being able to acknowledge those and really focus on those can make tourism a much more attractive industry. And also, I'm so glad that you mentioned the gender dynamic. We know globally nearly half the jobs in the tourism industry are filled by women, in some countries much, much more than that. And really thinking about that gender dynamic and how you can make these jobs more attractive, flexible hours, in-house childcare, making sure that there are sexual harassment policies in place, really can create a much more friendly workplace for women who are an important part of that workforce. And then I think the last point on that private sector partnership leads us perfectly in to talk to Noor, the head of the Pacific Asia Travel Association, which is one of the leading associations in the region with a very strong private sector membership. And so I'd like to hear from you. What are your members saying about the skills gaps that they are facing that are constraining some of the growth in the industry? And what can both the public and the private sector do to be able to address some of these gaps?
That's not just a very good question, but a very important question. And I'm so lucky to be seated here beside all the beautiful ladies. And I'm looking outside the beautiful scenery out there, why we're here. But anyway, I think to touch back to your important question, our members, largely private sectors, are really saying that there are huge gaps. But we need to look back quickly about what happened during the pandemic, when we lost a lot of workforce in the travel and tourism space. And of course, especially in ASEAN and in Asia, tourism is the first business to be closed because of the pandemic and last to reopen. And a lot of the workforce that has left the space will never come back. They went to gig economy, they went to other sectors. So the main gaps that our members are saying, and in fact, we published a report last year in collaboration with a lady down there, Hannah, is that number one is that there is a gap between the key players of the travel and tourism industry, coming from the public sector, private sector, educational institution, and most importantly, the youth. At PATA, we have more than 60 over educational institutions around the world who are members. And I think we have not done enough to connect ourselves with the future generation who are going to take over the industry. I think this is one of the gaps that we are seeing. And then the second institutional gap that we are seeing also is that the gap of knowledge and skill and capacity within the organization. Take, for example, if you talk about digitalization, AI adoption. In any organization that you are representing today, there will be someone that is highly skilled with AI, and some are just using ChatGPT. So, that easily explains what we are today. But I think in terms of this conversation and to the question that you asked, may I ask the audience, can I see hands, how many of you are 30 years and below? Or if you think that you are 30 years and below. Wow, there's like 4 or 5, right? So we're having this conversation, and these are the people that are going to take over the industry. I leave at that.
Thank you so much, Noor, for that interactive session. It's actually one of the things I've really appreciated about PATA's approach is that you have the Youth Ambassador Program. And if you haven't had an opportunity to engage with some of the youth membership of PATA, they are dynamic. They are smart, energetic, passionate, and they have a vision for the industry that will really take us into the future.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah. And speaking about the future, I'm going to turn to Sarah from the World Travel and Tourism Council. You recently published a fantastic report about the future of work in the travel and tourism industry. So, and then this report draws on in-depth interviews with your membership. Some of the top travel and tourism companies around the world are members of WTTC. Research, case studies, best practices. It's a really fantastic and very digestible study. So, what are your members saying about the pressing trends and the constraints in the travel and tourism workforce, and what does the future hold for us?
Thank you, Jess.
Hello.
Thank you, Jessie. It's great to join this panel. And I think, as you mentioned, we just had our report on the future of work published last year. So it's quite timely to share some of the perspectives from our reports. And as you as you know, our report, we interviewed our members and from the private sector. And it's very interesting to see that although we have seen tourism is booming, is back, and is bringing millions of jobs, but from the private sector, they also see a supply shock of the employment. So, and our research the major 20 economics about their future and their, the forecast of the job shortage. And from our data, we see that in the next decade, and there will be 43 million job shortage from the whole sector within these 20 major economics. And so that is not a small number. Behind this shortage, and we have seen some major trends behind that, and one is the demographic shift. And as we see that the stock shortage has becoming very apparent and draw our attention after COVID. But actually, COVID is not only the reason behind that. The strong is the demographic change, especially in those major economics such as Japan, China, Germany, and to see their working age population shrink. Actually, alone Japan will see in the next decade, they will have a 30%, behind their expected supply of the jobs. So these are the, within these jobs, nearly half of lower skilled positions or roles that is really in pressure. And so, and for many countries that only rely on domestic worker is no longer sustained simply because they do not have the needed population to support this workforce. So that is one we see the factor. And the second, many of our panelists mentioned about technology, the skill gap on the technology. Actually, we see that from our survey with our members, and technology is foreseen to be the most needed skill set, but so far is among the lowest proficiency. And also when we talk about technology, and there are different layer of needs. For example, for executive level, so they need to know the trends of technology, how they will impact their business, and how they can build the workforce capacity, the team to support the growth. And for the customer-facing roles, they need to know how to use these tools to attract their customers, to communicate with them. And also for operational roles, then they need to know how to improve the proficiency, the productivity, and also the efficiency. So there are different layers. And also the constraint is the speed. As we heard from our members, that usually the advance of technology is much faster than the program of training. And so especially for small, medium-sized business, it's very hard for them to catch that speed, to also got the resource to train their staff. So they feel particularly vulnerable among these sections. And the third, as Noor also mentioned, the young generation, the Gen Z, our industry has a brand of not very attractive to young generation. So they usually associate with long working hour or imbalance work-life imbalance. And so especially for the Gen Z, they are more up to these gig economy and remote work, more flexible. So I think there's a need for our company, so companies that they can kind of to change this employer brand, so to adapt more to the need of the young generation. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I see a common theme emerging here in terms of how can we improve the quality of these jobs, but also how can we rebrand the tourism industry as an exciting, dynamic place to work, using technology and really incorporating some of these new skills that we're seeing coming out in Gen Z. And 43 million That's a big number in terms of the missing workforce. But you know what? That's a big opportunity as well. And tourism is at its essence an opportunity for regional collaboration, and that's what we're talking about here today. So how can we work through ASEAN to help fill some of these gaps? I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We've been talking about the region, we've been talking about the world and the trends, but let's talk about the Philippines and what's happening in the Philippines and what's happening here in beautiful Cebu. I want to turn to Cleo from Mega World, who has a very impressive portfolio of tourism and hospitality stock in the country. And what are you seeing happening here in the Philippines? There's lots going on at the global level, at the regional level. There's lots of changes in tourism markets. How is that impacting the tourism workforce here? What are you doing to be able to equip your workers with the right types of skills and the right types of hard skills and soft skills to be able to adapt to some of these global and regional market changes?
Thank you so much, Jessie. I'd also like to thank ADB and DOT for allowing a homegrown brand as well as a private sector to have a voice in this panel, of course, with the representatives of the biggest organizations and our associations in the travel and tour industry globally. We at the Mega World Hotels and Resorts, being home to about 3,000 workforce and representing a homegrown brand here in our country, would like to focus on two things that are close to our hearts to address the pressing issues for the workforce. And I'd like to narrow that down to two things: mindful travel as well as our Muslim-friendly efforts. Mindful travel is a campaign that we recently launched for us to be able to address the pressing situations of what our workforce actually experience day in and day out. A lot of the panelists have mentioned what the workforce goes through in times of crisis and how resilience should be built in. We'd like to have a louder voice to really encourage travelers to be able to have conscious, sustainable, and intentional decisions as they travel. Your housekeepers should not be this may sound so basic, but the more we are louder and amplifying our voice for travelers to be so conscious about the imprint that they do, the more we protect our workforce. We definitely know that this might not be the industry where people are really looked up to because of the kind of labor job that there is in the industry, housekeeping, service. But the more we ask travelers to be more mindful, that's the level of respect that we are trying to institutionalize. Addressing the gaps, I love the question of Noor. 30 below, we hardly saw hands raised, but this is the reality. At Mega World Hotels and Resorts, we have the Next Generation Leadership Council. We want to attract the younger generation that this is how serious we are in developing you all to be ready succession for this industry. We are also really very focused on creating pride in what we do, especially for cultural and heritage preservation. We've got the Sampaguita brand of hospitality. It's our anchor to our service excellence. As Filipinos, it is our national flower and signified by the values of love, honor, and dignity. Yes, you see the travelers stay and travelers try to visit and maximize our destinations. But here we are trying to, because the younger generation wants to have an anchor that's deeply rooted on a deeper purpose. And that's our way of attracting them, that this is not a job. This is not just a job. This is us bannering what we do, what we're so strong at, especially the Filipinos, who always are proud of the warmth of the hospitality that we do. So another one is the Muslim-friendly efforts. And we're very proud that the Mega World Hotels and Resorts has been awarded by the Crescent Rating as the first hotel chain that worked with the Crescent Rating Group to make sure that we are Muslim friendly in travel. And we have certifications, and it's our way of equipping our workforce that we are an inclusive and a diversified work environment. It is our way of making them appreciate culture, because we know that the more that there's purpose in what we do, then the industry can definitely attract more and more individuals to have that passion to join this industry. We are not only a service industry. There's so much heart to what we do, and we're hoping that by doing that, we give them a deeper meaning and attract them to join the bandwagon of us ambassadors of the industry.
Thank you so much, Cleo. And we've talked a little bit about how we need a new brand, and I think this is our new brand, right? That tourism is about heart, it's about passion, it's not just about the job. But I really loved how you were very practical, right? We talk a lot about policy actions, about these big programs, but when we look in reality, what our company is doing, this is very clear. You are educating the traveler about how to be respectful, how to be appreciative, and that ultimately improves job quality, right? This is a very tangible, very realistic action that many companies can take. And then on the other hand, you're educating your workforce about new markets and really creating that mutual respect between the workforce and the traveler. And I think that's what the next generation really needs to be about, is making sure that there's real connection. And that's the beauty of the tourism industry, right? Okay, yes, sure, we go to hotels, we go to beaches, but the real reason that we travel is that connection, is that opportunity to meet those people and experience the destination through their eyes. All right, we've talked about the world, we've talked about the region, we've talked about the Philippines. I'm gonna go back to Sarah from WTTC and say, what are some of the examples, maybe outside of ASEAN, of best practices or initiatives or investments that you see companies and governments making to be able to address some of these challenges? And how can ASEAN learn from them and adapt them to the local context?
Thank you. I believe just now Jen has shared a lot of the best practices and initiatives across the world. But here I just want to maybe give two examples from our report. One is from Saudi Arabia and one is from India. So as you know, Saudi Arabia has been conducting very aggressive development plan and under their Vision 2030, and we do see that a greater opportunity also. They're trying to enhance or upskill their workforce, and that is also a great example that how aggressive government intervention and investment can help develop the workforce. And we have seen that from 2020 so far. So Saudi Tourism, the Ministry of Tourism, Saudi Arabia, they have started established a comprehensive ecosystem of training and education. So far, they have been providing nearly 650,000 training opportunities since 2020. So that is a huge number. And what they have doing three things majorly. Firstly, they are embedding tourism into their earlier education. So they're no longer waiting until the university, but they started from last year to add the tourism and hospitality courses into their high school curriculum. So, and also they partner with these major international institutions to provide the diplomas or some executive programs to help elevate the content of education. And secondly is they are creating a clear standards of the workforce. So in 2024, they launched the National Occupational Skill Standards. Employees now, they have a structured framework to define and benchmark required skills and competences. So that is very, instrumental for the private sector as well. And also they're driving inclusivity. So by having all these initiatives, Now, women represent approximately 46% of their total workforce. So that's, considering the context, is a very remarkable achievement. So we believe that for a country that have determination to develop the tourism and to educate the workforce, this could be a very good case to share. And also come back to the private sector. And for India, as one of our members, the Indian hotel companies, who is operating more than 300 hotels around the world, and including this luxury brand like Taj Hotel. So they have been doing a lot to retain their staff. So as you see, for hospitality industry, as Cleo may be very familiar that the high turnover rate is quite known for this industry. But for the Indian hotel company, they could retain an intention rate of close to 80%, and with the average, employee tenure of 6 years. So that is quite remarkable. So what they have been doing is they really focus on their career path development. So they offer that, the prove that path is possible, not only just promise. Actually, so for a few of their members of the executive team are from the bottom, the very junior role from a management trainee, and now they are become the leadership team of the company. And also they use AI to support the employee, and also for not only for the customer. So the employee, they can use this AI tool or mobile platform to access these HR process and policies, and also learning materials, so make their everyday work easier. And also they're very focused on the well-being of the staff, and they have been creating a lot of programs to support their mental health and to help their workforce culture building. So I think at the end of the day, tourism is as a people business, and we should also show our respect to our staff and our team as we show to our customer. And that will really help to retain them in this industry. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really love that very clear example from Saudi about embedding tourism in early education, looking at standards, and really driving inclusivity. I think that those are some common themes that we're seeing. So we have about 5 minutes left. I'm going to do rapid fire for the last 3 questions for our panelists. But Nora, I'm going to start with you. We've talked about public sector, we've talked about private sector. What are some tangible, actionable policy reforms or investments that public sector can make to help private sector address some of these issues? And really, really quick, so we can get a rapid round fire of this question.
I think this morning some of the ASEAN ministers already mentioned about the policy and the things that they are doing. I think the question is really how much they are going to do. We talk about upskilling, how much are you going to do that? And also I believe that it's not just about the Ministry of Tourism, how the Ministry of Tourism work in tandem with other government agencies, like Ministry of Human Resources, Ministry of Finance, because when we talk about the workforce, is beyond tourism itself. And also when we talk about the public-private sector, how do these two components work in tandem with the industry association, especially like international organization, OECD, PATA, WTCC, UN Tourism, and whatnot. So I think we need to look at on a more holistic approach. I think there's a bigger role that we need to play. It is very much into the action oriented. I think there are a lot of policy out there, but how do we go about doing it and doing it better? And especially when we talk about retaining and attracting the workforce in our industry.
Excellent. So let's keep working together. I think that's a key theme here. We have to keep the communication open, the partnerships open, public sector, private sector, education, youth. We all need to make sure that we're part of this dialogue. Cleo, I'll turn to you. Similar question. What investments or policy reforms could government make that can help you be able to achieve some of these great initiatives that you've already rolled out and really prepare for the next generation, the future of tourism workforce?
First, we're very grateful of the insights that we're hearing, and we really are the recipients of these policies, and we're hoping to really be able to really feel it on the ground as all these are supposed to be implemented in the future. But we'd be very glad and we'd get a lot of help. Allow me to just stress one thing. There are a lot of beautiful insights that have been shared. We'd really be getting enough help if the level of appreciation for each and every hospitality and travel worker or professional would really be given support system. We've seen how the hospitality professionals have been frontliners during the COVID times. Our Department of Tourism Secretary has overemphasized what happens to our workers when there are calamities and crisis management stops at a certain level. We'd be glad if we get that level of reform. We'd be part of the policy making and the reform in creating a support system where our professionals in the hospitality industry, allow me to frame it in a way, when a country sees the military workers and gives so much appreciation to military workers, healthcare workers, the industry does as much. We are in the front line, and we leave our families who can also be victims of the crisis and the calamity. We are frontlining, we interface, we're hands-on, we're supporting the government this much. If we can get as much appreciation, respect through policy reform and support system, not just dole-outs. We need infrastructure for tourism that will definitely benefit each and every hospitality professional, so we get to attract people who are A players, who can up the game for the premium service that we can give in destinations. When they see that there's so much support that our industry is getting from the government, and that will definitely give a big of attraction to the next generation to invest their years with us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Oh, round of applause for that. I have no comments. Jane, 1 minute. Following on that, what role can development partners and organizations play in helping us to actually implement some of these fantastic ideas?
Thank you. And can I just say I agree with the applause. I think if we could harness, bottle your enthusiasm, Cleo, I think we'd all, and use that as to provide momentum for this big challenge. We're on the right track. In terms of international organizations, a role of international organizations, development organizations, is to gather and share data, analysis, good practices, the kind of discussion that we're having today. What are countries doing? What's the private sector doing? What's working? More importantly, what's not working. Countries are always eager to share when things are going well. Yeah. At OECD, we really encourage countries to share also what is not working so that we can find solutions. Often we find that we learn more from what hasn't worked. We also work, the development organizations also work to elevate the macroeconomic impact of tourism across within our organizations, but within government as well. That was something which was raised this morning, that ours is a sector that is not always recognized. And by doing this can also help to mobilize funding to support workforce development initiatives, which we know is also a challenge within the sector. How do we fund these initiatives? Often we know what needs to be done, but we need the funding to do it. Another way the organizations can help is convening the key players, ministries, private sector, training providers, providing a space for structured dialogue. And I know certainly at the OECD, a key element of the work that we do is to provide tourism officials, tourism policymakers with the information, the knowledge they need to go to other parts of government and say, listen, tourism sector needs support. These are the sectors, these are the issues that need support in. And finally, I'd say mobilizing partnerships, to address these workforce shortages in a very lasting way across government, with the private sector, with education partners, with other international organizations, with the multilateral development banks, and you're far better placed than me to speak to that one, Jessie. But I think these partnerships that can really create the powerful levers to address particularly the structural issues in the sector at national level, at regional level, and at global level.
Thank you so much. And I think we'll end on that fantastic point, mobilization, convening, data, and funding. And for those of you who are interested about the funding and the financing, please make sure you stay to the end of the day when that is what our fireside chat will be about. So thank you so much to my panelists, and thank you to the audience.
Actually, panelists, please remain where you are with Jessie. Let's have a quick photo opportunity. Everybody converge in front of, please stand, please rise. Everybody stand in front of the stage. Let's give our panelists a round of applause and our moderator, Jessie. And guess what, everybody? With that, lunchtime. So lunch will be served at Il Primo or Mott 32. All of you, our dear delegates, will be ushered to the lunch venues. That is Il Primo and Mott 32. You'll have to proceed back to the Nustar.